What did happen on May 31st, 1921?
In 1921, a booming Black community in Tulsa, Oklahoma, popularly known as Black Wall Street, was viciously destroyed as a result of the high racial discrimination between whites and blacks. This is one of the darkest chapters of American history. This tragic, violent event brought down homes to ashes, tore families apart, and claimed hundreds of lives. This incident led to a mass burial that was ignored and erased from the annals of history. Unfortunately, no matter how well the truth was hidden, it'll always find its way of coming to the limelight. This is the story of a community that was flourishing despite the oppositions, a symbol of Black excellence and economic power. It was a symbol of hope in an America that was characterized by racial inequality, segregation, and denying Black citizens their civil rights. As if that wasn't enough, the incident wiped off the community from the map in a matter of hours in a violent attack known as the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921. However, this isn't just a story of violence and brutality, but one characterized by systemic racism, greed, and fear. This is a story that was intentionally swept under the carpet and forgotten for decades. How could a thriving community be destroyed and silenced? What did they try to hide? In this video, we'll explore the hidden truth that has been kept in the shadows for decades and explore how jealousy, racial hatred, and economic envy that led to the destruction of Black Wall Street and why this incident matters now more than ever. We'll explore the truth behind the Tulsa Race Riot, the untold tale, the forgotten voices, and the lasting impact of one of the most tragic racial massacres in the history of America. To fully understand what happened, let's take a dive into the past. Let's begin. During the early 1900s, Tulsa, Oklahoma was a thriving, well-to-do oil community, but within its developing city, something iconic was happening. A self-dependent, prosperous Black community was being formed from scratch. This was the Greenwood District, later known as Black Wall Street. Greenwood was built out of necessity. Racial laws in Tulsa forced African Americans to live in separate regions, but this segregation became an avenue for Black economic independence. African Americans who had migrated from the South, looking for a more profitable opportunity, discovered that while they couldn't blend in with white society, they could create a world of their own. One of the iconic personalities in Greenwood's development was O.W. Gurley, a focused entrepreneur who purchased 40 acres of land specifically for Black people to develop. Shortly, other African American businessmen and entrepreneurs followed suit. This created a self-dependent economy for the community than any other district in the city. Black Wall Street wasn't just an ordinary place to live in, but a symbol of what Black success could look like in America, with doctors, lawyers, barbershops, theaters, and restaurants flourishing. While Greenwood was at its peak, it thrived in over 200 businesses like grocery stores, schools, churches, and luxury shops. It was a home to some of the wealthiest Black citizens of good repute in America at the time. The district wasn't just economically buoyant, but culturally rich and socially vibrant. It was the hope of Blacks across the globe. However, this success wasn't without a cost. As they thrived, the white community developed hatred, anger, and bitterness towards them. Many white Tulsans who were struggling economically resulting from World War I perceived the Greenwood success with envy and disdain. This resentment was fueled by the increasing influence of white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan, who had a strong presence in Tulsa and had growing hatred for the Black race. This wasn't about race alone, but power, wealth became a threat to the racial system they once depended on. The tension hovered in the shadows for years, but in 1921, a single incident caused an explosion that led to one of the most tragic racial massacres in American history. On May 30th, 1921, what looked like a normal routine would ignite a devastating tragedy that would cause a high level of havoc. Dick Rowland, a 19-year-old young black man who was working as a shoe shiner. Just like many other African Americans in Tulsa, he was already used to the strict racial laws that isolated black people from mingling with whites. But for black men, these were even more dangerous, especially when it comes to interacting with white women. That day, Dick Rowland went into the elevator in the Drexel building. Coincidentally, a young white woman named Sarah Page, an elevator operator, was also in the elevator. What happened next remains a mystery that was clouded by conflicting narrations and fueled by racist assumptions. Some narratives say that Rowland accidentally stepped on Page's foot, which made her cry out. Others insinuate that he may have tripped, reaching out to find a balance, or that there was a misunderstanding between the two. But in the system dominated by racism, it didn't take much for rumors to burst out of control. On the next day, the Tulsa Tribune defending Rowland, but the tensions became more intense. A confrontation broke out between the armed black men and the increasingly volatile white mob, as their great community was torn apart. As though the destruction was not enough, eyewitnesses reported something more devastating. It was said that aircraft, while official reports tried to cover up the roles of these planes and the bombs, eyewitnesses remained steadfast in saying what actually happened, for up to 20 unattended to. The Tulsa police partially sided with the violent white mobs, giving them more morale to attack instead of protecting the black citizens. The National Guard was called into the scene, but before they arrived, the destruction had already gotten out of control. Greenwood had already been destroyed. When the intensity of the massacre had subsided, the black residents in Greenwood who survived the onslaught were held at gunpoint and taken to internment camps where they were held under guard while their homes burned behind them. Over 6,000 black residents were detained in makeshift camps and were unable to return to the charred remains of their lives. When the smoke from the fire had cleared, over 35 city blocks had been destroyed and about 300 black men, women, and children were found dead. Over 1,200 homes were burned flat to the ground, leaving thousands homeless, wiping their livelihoods away and turning their dreams into ashes. The Greenwood district that was once a giant and an example of black success now lay in ruins. However, despite the intensity of the destruction, there was no effort to help the black residents rebuild. Insurance companies refused to pay claims, citing riot clauses. The city of Tulsa and its white residents tried to pose the black community as the aggressors, claiming they sparked the violence that destroyed them. Despite the chaos, there were no arrests, no convictions, and no justice for the black citizens of Greenwood. In just a matter of hours, Greenwood became unrecognizable. After the massacre, the officially recorded death toll was reported at 36, but many survivors and historians believe the figures were much higher, closer to 300. A lot of blacks laid wasted in the streets, and many were immediately buried in mass graves. Thousands of survivors were left homeless, wandering about, trying to sustain their wrecked remains. Shockingly, as the clash dissolved, there was no call for a crime that was committed. Instead, blames were posed at the black community. Local authorities who backed members of the white mob refused to acknowledge their involvement. The police chief at the time, John Gustafson, even accused black citizens of starting the attack. To make matters worse, insurance companies denied almost every claim for damaged property that was filed by black residents. These companies refused to compensate the victims of the damage of homes and businesses caused by the riot. Black families had lost everything they thought they had overnight: their property, their source of livelihoods, and even some loved ones, and also their future, with no hope of recovering it. Instead of the city's officials to help rebuild the community, they zoned out of the whole matter. It became clear that Greenwood wasn't welcome to rise again. In the following months, the city and the local press strived to completely erase the massacre from history. Records of what had happened had been destroyed, and the story was buried both figuratively and literally. They came up with a law that discouraged public discussion of the massacre. This made the people of Tulsa to live in silence about the horror of 1921. It was almost impossible for the victims to live with that silence as their pain was being erased. Some survivors struggled to rebuild the little they could, while some others left Tulsa. But the memory of the injustice which they have experienced has created a dark spot in their minds. It was so bad that the national media largely ignored it, and it wasn't taught in history classes in schools. Several generations grew up without ever hearing about the destruction of Black Wall Street. It became as though the community never existed at all, or it was just a fiction tale. The massacre remained in the shadows for about 75 years from the annals of American history. This was an unimaginable chapter that Tulsa and a large part of America chose to sweep under the carpet, but slowly the truth began to come to the surface as survivors began to spill out the truth concerning the Tulsa Race Massacre. The survivors, their descendants, and historians are determined and voicing out their demand for justice. In the late 1990s, as the country began to confront more of its racial past, the state of Oklahoma began the first official investigation that delved into the incident of 1921. A commission group was formed to expose the full story of the massacre, the deaths, the destruction, and the lasting impacts on Tulsa's Black community. The assignment was straightforward: to finally tell the truths about what actually happened in Greenwood. The results from the investigation were a confirmation to what a lot of Black communities were saying. The death toll had been significantly underreported, and the violence was obviously an arrangement that the sudden coincidence which they had earlier reported. The commission also exposed new evidence that was supported by eyewitness accounts of mass graves where victims had been secretly buried. Their names, legacy, and lives had been erased from the record of lives. In 2020, almost a century after the massacre, Tulsa made national headlines when a group of archaeologists and forensic scientists began to search for the mass graves. They embarked on this activity with the aid of modern technology like ground-penetrating radar. They were able to navigate and uncover the remains of the massacre victims, offering tangible proof of the hidden atrocities that were committed in 1921. As they began to open these graves in 2021, 100 solid years after the Tulsa Race Massacre, can be buried, and how important it is to fight for justice, even when it looks as if the world's lack of resources and social inequality continue to reflect the long-lasting damage of the massacre, of erasing or downplaying the violent history of racial oppression. The Tulsa Race Massacre became one of the with not just characterized by destruction, but also of resilience. Despite unimaginable loss, the people of Greenwood stood in strength, determined to rebuild their city. And in recent years, the descendants of survivors have made it their mission to tell the full truth in order not to let the massacre or the pain of the victims be of racial violence and inequality. The story of the Tulsa Race Massacre has become a powerful symbol of the fight for justice among the Black community. It also stands as a reminder of what was lost, but also as a call to action, an urgent demand to confront the past and address the enduring impacts of systemic racism. The massacre's legacy also influences how we perceive reparations today. Across the country, calls for reparations to Black communities, whether for slavery, Jim Crow, or events like the Tulsa Massacre, are gaining mass attention. The descendants of those who lost everything in Greenwood continue to push for economic justice, knowing that true healing cannot happen without reparations for the generational wealth that was stolen and destroyed. The Tulsa Race Massacre is a painful reminder of how far America still has to go in its pursuit of racial inequality and social dominance. But it's also a reminder of the resilience of Black communities in the face of unimaginable adversity. The legacy of Black Wall Street endures, not just in memory, but in the ongoing fight for justice, equality, and the acknowledgement of historical wrong. Comment, "Let's rebuild Tulsa," if you're intentional about rebuilding the Black community. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe.